What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the MTG Thoughtcast. Thanks for tuning in and listening. I am your host, Joseph. We also have the man of the hour, the man with the best background, my brother, John Kendall, in the house. What's going on, John?
That is not where I thought you were headed with that, but hey.
How you doing, man?
I'm fine. Things are great. We're here. It's Miller time. Let's do it.
It's Millen time, baby. We'll get there in a second. And then also here is the wizard of audio himself, Jared Bobier. What's going on, dude?
What's up, everybody? I keep bending down because my microphone is a little further away than it normally is.
Let's just jump out of frame real quick.
But
How's it going,
fine.
dude?
It's really good. I need to stop bending down because it's honestly fine where it is. But
yeah, no, you
it's
sound
just
great,
a force of habit.
You know what's great is even if you sound bad, you're going to be the one who fixes it in post.
Exactly. That's my job.
We love that. Well, guys, today we have a listener submitted question to talk about. Coming to us all the way from Seth on the Discord is today's topic, which is why does no one play Mill in Commander? So this caused enough discourse and discussion on the Discord and internally that I thought it'd be good to just do a podcast about it. So today we're going to be talking about, is Mill actually good? Is it bad? Is it even playable? And why does no one play it? So I think to dive in, John, you have some Oracle duties.
I do. So let's open the floor just in general. Do either of you like Mill?
No.
Not a Mill player.
Not a Mill player.
Ever have played Mill.
I used to be, though. I think that there's a sort of a natural progression of starting out playing Magic, and then you realize that there are alternate win conditions, and the easiest one to achieve is mill somebody's library out. For anybody who doesn't know what mill is just you take the top card of your library and you put it into your graveyard. That comes
to that degree, yeah. I can bring it up specifically, but
nice.
Yeah, to that degree.
But yeah, so like if you'd say like mill 10, that just means take 10 cards off the top of your library, put them straight into the graveyard. And if you would draw a card and you don't have any cards left in your library, you lose the game. So this leads us to the strategy of mill, which is trying to deck your opponent.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I'm not a mill player. That's certainly not. And I don't think you are either, Jared. But John, I feel like you have a bit of an affinity for mill.
Yeah, I mean, so mill is kind of interesting because when you talk about it, it's you have to really define which direction on the mill you're talking about, right? So there is your opponent mill, and then there's self mill, and those kind of things are not inherently distant from each other, right? Certain kinds of spells that would target a player, or all players, I suppose, for targeted mill in one form of a deck that can be used as fuel against your opponents, but in other particular builds, it could be used for your benefit. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it really comes down to then the question of what's your preference on mill per se. Is do you not like mill as a target against your opponents, or do you not like mill as a self-mill strategy?
Oh, I love self-mill is the thing. I play a ton of graveyard decks, but it's funny, in my mind, I see those as different things, where there's a bit about milling out your opponents that feels sort of like taking their agency away from them in a game. Where if you're milling all of their good cards away from their library, it is a little bit feels bad. But milling myself is always to fuel my own strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm right there with you. So fun fact, this is a little just lore on me. I'm a triplet.
We're getting the Jared lore.
I'm a triplet. So that's great because I kind of had built-in play group growing up.
Do both of your brothers play Magic?
Me and Chase actively do. My brother Heath played Magic when we were growing up. He just doesn't have anyone to play with now. I bet he would, but he lives on the different side of the country from the rest of us. So
you got to get Heath on the Discord.
Dude, I do. What am I doing? I'm slacking. Heath, this one's shout out to you, I guess.
Heath.
He doesn't even know this exists. But anyway,
But he will if he joins the Discord in this link that you can
which
find.
is what the rest of you guys should also do.
Somewhere
there you go.
Yep.
To join the Discord.
Bam.
Good
plug.
John.
Got him.
Got him. So the reason I bring that up is growing up, my brothers and I kind of respected each other's individuality by never copying what the other would do. So if one of my brothers would dress a certain way, I would dress a different way. Like we picked different favorite colors, like all this weird stuff that probably doesn't happen. I'm assuming doesn't necessarily happen as intentionally if you're not a triplet, or maybe it's just a weird thing me and my brothers did. Asking myself a lot of questions right now. But
wow.
That said, with Magic, we all got into Magic and we all kind of like gravitated towards different colors on the color wheel. And I became the red player who played Red Burn. Also, fun fact, I was way more into Yu-Gi-Oh! When I first started playing card games. And Red Burn was like the cheapest way to also just make a really powerful deck, because I was sort of like playing Magic on the side and playing Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot more intentionally. But my brother Chase played a lot of blue, and there's a lot of mill just built into a lot of blue cards in the kind of blocks we were playing in. And then Heath would play like bruiser, like green, black stuff. So yeah, I have experience playing against mill and hating that, because I was playing really crappy decks that had 0 grave recursion. So if a card got milled away, it's just a card I never saw and never got to play. So as a player playing against mill, I hated that. I don't hate it anymore, because I've kind of, as I've grown as a Magic player, I've kind of adapted into a much more like, I'm not going to be mad at someone for playing the cards that are in the game. Like even last night, we were playing on Spell Table, and Joseph, you played a Smokestack, and we were playing like pseudo CDH, like super high, like highest power decks we all have. Except for your legitimate Urza CDH deck. Yeah. You did not play that one. You were playing Super Tune Tivit. Smokestack was there, and John and I were trying to figure out how to play around Smokestack. And I wasn't butthurt about Smokestack. Yeah, it's a crazy permanent, but it's a card in the game that's fully legal to play, and it's fine. So anyway, that said, I don't dislike mill as a mechanic. I think it's intrinsically weak in Commander, because people have 40 life, but they have 100 cards in their library. And even though they start out with drawing 7, drawing a card on their first turn, so that 92 cards in the library, you still got to get rid of 92 cards.
Yeah, every card counts for just over 1% of the deck.
I just saw that green flash, by the way. I don't know what that's about, but we'll figure it out later.
It is what it is.
Yeah. So also, we'll probably dive into this more later. My last thing for now until we move on. But Blightsteel Colossus, Eldrazi Titans, all the things that hit the graveyard and like reshuffle themselves back in, like those cards exist. So even if you were to try to go for a mill win and someone has that card in their deck, you don't actually mill them out. Yeah. It just hits the graveyard, goes back into their library, and then they can draw a card on their turn, and it's going to be that. So,
right, and that's what unfortunately leads mill to sometimes basically get shuffled into basically being called control, right? Because like if you want to try to do the mill thing, you need your other pieces to either accelerate how much the mill is operating or act as your buffer for everything that the mill can't hit. Right? It's like you said, if they've got, and we'll talk about mill responses later, but like if someone has those kinds of cards that is keeping their library fresh, you need other pieces in your deck to compensate for that. And then unfortunately that just sometimes just looks like bad Dimir control.
Yeah, you end up like having to play like Leyline of the Void or Dothy Voidwalker, or even like there's various artifacts that do graveyard hate, but you have to play those in order to get around the things like that, which means that that's more card slots that are not being dedicated to actually winning the game.
Right.
Yeah.
So it inherently weakens the deck by having to throw in pieces to make sure that you can win, or to make sure that you don't just auto lose.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of like it's to me, I think mill whenever I say mill as well, I refer to mill as in a way to beat your opponents, milling their libraries.
Yeah, self-mill is different.
Yeah, I don't even consider self-mill in this category.
Nope.
To me, it feels totally different. Self-mill for like Underworld Breach decks is amazing. Slimefoot and Squee.
I mean, yeah,
Get
super
Rog.
good at Slimefoot and Squeeze, super great with Thassa's Oracle. Like, there are legitimate ways to win the game by milling yourself. And
Strongest deck in
significantly-
EDH does that.
I mean,
Adnaz, Thassa's, Demonic
exactly.
Consultation.
That's essentially self-milling. But even then, if we're talking about like the spirit of mill, it's just an enabler for yourself rather than exactly what you said, which is when I think of, I'm playing a mill deck, I'm trying to win the game by milling everybody else's libraries out.
Yeah, and it's very tricky to do, at least well, without again turning into a control shell,
Right.
or a hates deck. Not hate bears per se, but like you're compounding your mill with all forms of other like punishing style effects, which is totally fine and legitimate, and built the right way, especially with the right commander and other pieces in the 99. You can do some silly stuff. You can do some very silly things.
Yeah. Let's dive into like, if you were going to play mill in Commander, what would you do? How would you build it in a way that you can actually win the game by milling out everybody else's library?
So for me would be utilizing that mill with cards that allow you to recur creatures from graveyards, creatures or spells. I'm like, instantly what comes to mind is just the card Reanimate, but then there's also a variety of other spells and abilities that go into any person's graveyard and goes and gets a specific thing. Diluvian Primordial, Reanimate, as I mentioned before. Rise of the Dark.
So you're talking about probably
Rise of the Dark
playing
Realms.
Blue-black.
Yes, yeah. This might sound weird, mostly just because Bruvac is arguably the best mill commander, but
we'll talk about Bruvac in a sec.
I don't think you can do mill without having a second color. I think mono blue mill is just going to be too hard. You do not have enough answer pieces for other aspects of the game playing mono blue. Bruvac goes into your mill deck, but I don't think Bruvac is a good commander.
Well, Bruvac has 2 single card combos. So you have Maddening Cacophony. Well, okay, Bruvac. Talk about Bruvac for a second.
Yes, let's bring up Bruvac.
Because I actually would disagree. I would say that if you're going to try to win the game by milling everybody out, I think you have to play Bruvac as your commander. Or if you're playing blue-black, you have to play Bruvac in the deck and have his combos in here.
Right, and that I agree with.
Yeah, so Bruvac the Grandiloquent is 2 and a blue for a 1/4. It says if an opponent would mill 1 or more cards, they mill twice that many cards instead. So it just doubles your mill, which is very strong. He combos with, hold on, let me get into the synergy cards here. Maddening Cacophony.
Maddening Cacophony and Traumatize, yeah, at least. And
Yes.
and a few other ones as well. Maddening Cacophony, Traumatize, Fleet Swallower.
Yeah. So Maddening Cacophony is 2 mana for a sorcery. It says each opponent mills 8 cards, but it has kicker of an extra 4. If the spell was kicked, instead each opponent mills half their library rounded up. So what that does with Bruvac is it says each opponent mills half their library and then mills the other half. So with 1 card, it's 6 mana total plus your Bruvac. So 9 mana, 2 cards. I have milled everybody's library out except for mine.
And I get your point. If one of those 2 card combos is always in your hand because of the command zone,
yes,
then you basically need a blue tutor spell for a sorcery, which blue has.
100%.
So I get it. Yeah. But
yes.
So what sucks about that is now you're in a linear line of play. It's like,
exactly.
Okay, you're playing mono blue mill with Bruvac. Everyone's going to know exactly what you're playing. It's like, going to know exactly what you're doing. Whereas you can get some really nice variants if you're doing especially a 2-color commander. Yes, Bruvac in the 99, but you get some really good variants on that mill if you're doing something like Lazav, Dimir Mastermind.
Okay.
Lazav is blue, black for a shapeshifter, I believe he is. He is a 3/3. He's a 3/3 hexproof. When a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you may have Lazav become a copy of that card, except its name is Lazav. It's legendary in addition to its other types, and it has hexproof and this ability. So instead of doing just the box standard, like your opponents will always see it coming of, Bruvac, Maddening Cacophony, you all lose. You get to do something a little more interesting with Lazav by, hey, I'm going to mill you some X random amount of cards from your library, and oops, my Lazav just accidentally turns into a hexproof Craterhoof. Or
Yikes.
whatever, you know?
True. Do you feel like Captain Nagathrod is a better version of Lazav?
What card?
Captain Nagathrod. What?
I think that's different. I think that's better in a different direction, right? Like Lazav doesn't care about needing a particular creature type. Captain Nagathrod and to an extent as well, Anawan the Ruin Thief. Both of them care about a specific creature type to help you with your mill.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, so Captain Nagathrod is 3 blue and a black for a 3/6. Horrors you control have menace. And whenever a horror you control deals combat damage to a player, that player mills that many cards. So it turns big creatures into big mill. But it also is separate line of text. At the beginning of your end step, choose target artifact or creature card in an opponent's graveyard that was put there from their library this turn. Put it onto the battlefield under your control. So you don't even need to be playing horrors. You could just be playing Captain Nagathrod with all of these, like each opponent, mills X cards. Yeah. And that will trigger his last ability as well. So you could play it as horror tribal, but you also could just be playing mill with it, and then you get the extra value of getting their creatures on your end step. I still don't think it's amazing, but it does something.
It does something, yeah. Anawan rewards you in a kind of similar method as well. Anawan the Ruin Thief is 2 blue and a black for a 2/4 vampire rogue. Gives other rogues +1/+1, and whenever one or more rogues you control deal combat damage to a player, that player mills a card for each 1 damage dealt to them. If a player mills at least one creature card this way, you draw a card.
Okay, so it's that does seem better to me because you're just drawing cards rather than relying on.
Yeah, and that would trigger. Yeah, and that'll trigger off of each player as well. So if you're in and rogues tend to always have sort of like good evasion to them as well. Rogues and ninjas they kind of overlap a little bit. So if you're like, say, sneak damaging in like 2-3 at a time, and you get each of your opponents for at least one creature, you've denied now your opponent a creature right into their graveyard. And 2, you're getting card advantage out of it now. So yeah, that's one way to turn it around pretty good.
I like that.
Yeah.
I think the other thing with playing it in Commander is you're just forced into playing the best mill cards that there are, which some of them can be a little pricey. Like, this is kind of an expensive deck that doesn't, like, if you're going to be, I don't know, there's a lot with it, but like, if you're going to be playing an expensive deck, you could just be playing a different strategy. I understand wanting to mill out and having the cool factor and the wow factor of I've won the game because everybody decked themselves. But like, you'd have to get into like Altar of the Brood, which let me pull that up real quick.
A 1 mana artifact that when a permanent enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills a card.
Yes. So that's nearly a $10 card. Like, just to have something that does some mill when your permanents enter. And like Mind Crank.
I can read that one. Whenever an opponent loses life, that player mills that many cards.
Yes. How much is Mindcrank?
It's cheap.
So
Is it?
185.
Oh yeah.
It
On
used
Card
to be,
Kingdom is $2.
yeah, it used to be more, but it's been reprinted a little bit. But yeah, and this now leads into the point that you were saying as well, that like Mill needs extra components to make it decent, and sometimes those extra components are higher up there. Did you notice when you were talking about it as well? Have you actually seen the price for Bruvac himself, by the way?
I have not.
Bruvac himself is still $30.
God, see, this is what I mean. It's like,
Why?
these are really expensive, really linear cards. So like, if you're buying a Bruvac, it only does the Bruvac thing. Like, it's not like if you're buying, you could, for that price, you could nearly buy a Demonic Tutor and it goes in any of your black decks. Or like, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many, especially if you have unlimited funds, then sure, like buy your Bruvacs, do what you want, like build your Bruvac deck. It does the Bruvac thing. It's going to do Bruvac every time.
If you have unlimited money, play something cooler.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying. Like, you're going to lose to yourself a lot of the times just because you have to mill roughly 300 cards in order to win the game with a mill deck.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 300 minus roughly 30. So it's like 270 cards is sort of your target. So you have to play things that say each opponent mills, which there's only a few of.
On that same train of thought, like as far as super linear play patterns, like this kind of gets into the debate of like where do you draw the line in the sand between EDH and CDH? Like CDH has very linear lines of play because it's whatever the most optimized line of play is what you do, and that's intentional, and it's actually super fun because it's never as linear as you think when you have everyone playing at that power level. But when you're playing mill like this, it like unintentionally jacks the power level up of your deck to like maximum.
Yeah.
So you're not going to get to play this deck all that often. When you do, everyone's going to hate you for it because like the only thing people hate like equally besides you taking their permanents or playing their cards instead of them is like mill. Like,
yeah,
you're just
I
not
don't
allowing
get
them
this anymore.
Yeah, you're not allowing them to play unless they're playing Slimefoot and Squee. They're not going to be happy that you're milling their deck.
Yeah, but the thing is,
like,
this also brings up another good point of going back to like if you're playing mill, you have to play Graveyard Hate as well. Because there's so many graveyard focused commander decks that if you're just playing mill with no Graveyard Hate, you're going to be unintentionally fueling your opponents that are playing graveyard decks.
Yeah.
Because self mill is inherently a stronger strategy than I'm going to mill my opponents out.
Yeah, you only have to mill 92 cards.
Yeah, exactly. And then play a Thassa's Oracle or like, reanimate your own creatures, things like that.
Exactly.
So it cuts what you have to do in 3/4. Like,
yeah.
But back to if you're playing this, what are some of the best mill cards that you can be playing? We talked about Altar of the Brood. We talked about Bruvac. We talked about Maddening Cacophony.
I've got a few. Either of you wanna
dig
or
in,
do you want me to take it? Okay. I'd love to talk about one of my favorite creatures, Mr. Big Abs. We love Big Abs. Consuming Aberration.
Oh, he's so good.
Consuming Aberration, I 100% count this as a mill card because it does the mill thing while actually giving you a win condition attached to that.
Yeah.
Basically. Consuming Aberration, and I've always just called him Big Abs. We love our Big Abs. 3 blue and a black for a star horror. Consuming Aberration's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your opponent's graveyards. It counts all. So if you're in a 3-person game and 4-person player commanders, 3 players counting your opponents. If they've already milled, say, let's talk small, right? A little bit of game has happened so far at this point. Let's say you've got a collective 4 cards in each opponent's graveyards. Like, you get this guy down, he's already 12 power.
Mm-hmm.
That's big in and of himself. But then he fuels himself even more. When you cast a spell, doesn't matter what kind, each opponent mills cards from the top of their library until they mill a land and then puts the cards into their graveyard.
Dumb.
So anything
you cast a Ponder, and all of a sudden that turns into adding 15 plus power onto him.
Yep.
Yeah, he's one of the best.
It is. It's incredibly good. Because he's a threat that you have to answer it, right? Like, even if you don't get the full library mill out of Consuming Aberration, you can't just let 30 something odd power sit on the board. You know what I mean?
It's true. The thing is, he costs 5. He is an expensive creature.
Right, but like for the same reason why like I'll always stand by like say Realm Seekers as an incredible card as well. Like, yeah, you got to get up to that high power level, or you got to get up to that mana cost to cast it down. But if you're casting it in the right time, Realm Seekers, like I was saying about Realm Seekers, usually always coming in at 20 something on power. Consuming Aberration, same thing. You've got 4 turns set up to mill cards out of your opponent's libraries. He comes down. Whoops, here's 20 power on the board for 5 mana.
Yeah.
Sometimes even earlier, if it's let's say you do like, you've got your mana rocks and whatever on turns 1 through 3, and then you've also set something up with like say Alter the Brood, like you had just mentioned earlier.
Right.
Alter the Brood, play a few permanents, get to 5 mana, Consuming Aberration comes down. Everybody's already up to 7 or 8 cards in their graveyard already.
Yeah.
Now you've got a 24 power guy on turn 4.
But John,
it dies to Doomblade.
Joseph, it's black. It doesn't die to Doomblade.
Wow.
But it does. It does die to Swords to Plowshares, which is played, and it is like the number 1 most card.
Yeah, they're going to gain
card
30 life off of that Swords to Plowshare.
But yes. I mean that applies to every creature.
You can't evaluate it based on the dice. The dice and the Doomblade thing is just a meme. But
if creatures were bad because they got exiled by swords, then every creature in the game would be bad. So.
Can I talk about one of my favorite mill cards?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so what I try to evaluate on is how many cards does each one of these things represent for how much mana it is. And I think one of the best value creatures to get an unbelievable amount of mill is my boy Ruin Crab.
Dude, I was just looking at that.
Ruin Crab's the man. It's 1 mana for an 0/3, so you can get it in on turn 1. Landfall, each opponent mills 3 cards.
Yeah.
So in a 4-player game, every land that you play, or like if you're playing fetch lands, that counts for 2 landfall triggers, is going to be 9 total cards off of everybody else. That's ridiculous. That's more than Alter the Brood.
Yeah.
Just for playing a land. And also it works well with Alter the Brood, where it adds an extra 1 onto each of that. It becomes each opponent mills 4. So like that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking for playing mill, is cheap, repeatable, very high quantity mill cards that target each opponent.
I'm doing
I would be looking to play a ton of Ruin Crabs. This is why I think if I was playing mill in Commander, I would be playing Finax, God of Deception as the commander, which is 3 blue and a black for a 4/7 god that is indestructible. And as long as your devotion to blue or black is less than 7, it's not a creature. So it just sits as an enchantment for a while. But creatures you control have tap. Target player puts the top X cards, mills X cards, where X is the creature's toughness. So works super well with our boy Ruin Crab, where he just becomes landfall. Everyone mills 3. I can tap it to make someone mill an additional 3. Works crazy well with Consuming Aberration.
Yes, it does.
Things like that, and things like White of Precinct 6. Which is 1 and a black for a 1/1 that gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your opponent's graveyards. So like the Finax deck is using mill to enable your creatures to get bigger, because you have all that, Consuming Aberration, White of Precinct 6, stuff like that, that is then going to snowball into like, okay, well now Consuming Aberration is a 30/30, and I can tap to mill somebody 30 cards, and then on that, now it's a 60/60. And then tap, mill somebody for 60. Now it's at 120. Like, it gets huge. And then somebody loses the game and it gets significantly smaller. But yeah, stuff like that, because then you have a secondary out as well, which Finnax takes it away from the linearness that something like Bruvac would have. You also don't have to play Bruvac in the deck, which is nice because that saves you $30. So your secondary out is I have all these gigantic creatures. You can't play Graveyard Hate in the Finnax deck, though, which does suck because then all of your creatures become 0/0s and die immediately. So
Yep.
there are, you'd have to play like Grafdigger's Cage, stuff like that is just static Graveyard Hate rather than I'm going to exile people's graveyards, which again goes back to the same issue, which is you're now diluting the power of your deck to play cards that allow you to not immediately lose to the cards that you are playing.
Yeah.
So we're kind of creating a cyclical discussion here with like, wow, this is super cool, except when it doesn't work. And then, but now it's really cool. And then, I'm losing myself again. And like,
it's a little bit like what I think I've heard the Command Zone guys coin this term, but like magical
Command Zone guys.
Honestly, awesome. I owe it to them for getting me besides you, Joseph, they were the people that got me interested in Magic again after not playing for a couple years.
I love Jimmy Wong. I love Rachel Weeks. Those are great people.
So they coined the term magical Christmas land. And to me, Mill is the magical Christmas land strat. Like, there is nothing you're going to have to work harder to try to pull off than a mill strategy.
Yes.
Especially like mono blue mill, like incremental value with like psychic corrosion, milling like 2 cards a turn off someone. Like, that is terrible.
Yes.
I have a different outlook on psychic corrosion. I was going to bring it up, but you finish your thought.
I cannot wait to hear that. But yeah, as far as like cards I can remember my brother Chase playing against me and me absolutely despising, because we weren't playing Commander, we're playing 60 card format, and I'm just like, this sucks.
Yeah, Mill is amazing in 60.
Yes. Especially because we weren't playing with like Eldrazi Titans or things that like put things back into your library. Like I said, I was playing a lot of mono red, and I was just like, there goes 3 of my best damage spells. I guess I'm not casting those, and I'm probably not going to win the game. So I mean, Joseph, I like your pick for Phoenix. If I could, I'll just say what looks the most interesting to me, coming from someone who's never played Mill, never thought about it. Xander, Lord Xander the Collector. He's 4 blue, black, red. So Grixis Mill, and to me that's really exciting. Thinking about the things you guys were talking about with what's that? The creature y'all were talking about a second ago that grows with the size of the
Consuming Aberration.
Yeah, consuming Aberration. So what makes that card even better is if it has haste, and you can get cards like Anger into your graveyard, or just all red has so many ways to make you get haste. Because there's nothing worse than having like a huge Consuming Aberration, and then you're just like, okay, it dies to removal before I get to untap with it.
It dies to Doomblade.
It dies to Doomblade.
But that's kind of the story of how creatures like that like get played and then dealt with. Like Managorger Hydras, anything that is like, I play this, it's going to get huge by the time it comes back to me. You're just going to be lucky that you untap with it. It's basically removal magnets. Mm-hmm. It's honestly kind of an interesting way to think about like including things like that in your deck. Like, is it worth it? Like when you're evaluating what cards go in there.
Yeah. And I would
depending
say, like,
on how,
if I may, those kind of cards are worth it as long as that's not your only strategy. If you're relying on those things, I mean, you saw it in the budget game we played yesterday, Jared. As soon as you lost your Managorger Hydra, you were out of the game. So like all of these decks kind of hinge around Consuming Aberration. So like you either are going to lose it because you're going to draw so much attention to yourself by playing the Consuming Aberration that you're just going to lose it, or you have to play protection for it which goes back to having to play Graveyard Hate, where now your deck is so diluted with protection and Graveyard Hate that like you can't run all the mill cards that you need to. Or even if you could just be playing better cards. And you could just be choosing a different strategy that doesn't rely so heavily on a creature sticking around.
So having those kind of cards in there, having like a single way to be able to mill as a win is not your main focus. I think that's a way you can have mill be good. It's what I wanted to bring back to the point what you brought up, Jared, about Psychic Corrosion specifically. Psychic Corrosion, I think, just inherently, because it just inherently happens to be a mill card, but I think it's one of, if you're playing Draw Go, I think it's one of its best win conditions outside of doing Oracle Lapman, right? Draw Go decks are trying to draw their own libraries, not necessarily in a self-mill kind of fashion. And you need cards, you need win condition cards in that deck to be able to finish a game. I personally play a mono blue Lear Disciple of the Drowned. The whole focus of that deck is drawing cards as fast as I can, because I can utilize spells from my hand and then spells as flashback from the graveyard. And Psychic Corrosion is one of my win conditions that's in that deck, but it's not the only win condition, right? So like,
it's a line of play that you have that you could sometimes win by milling everyone.
Right, because like, I know, people aren't crazy about combos, right? But like, if you're in a point where you're infinitely drawing your deck, if you're sitting on a Psychic Corrosion, everyone else will mill out before you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it's not the deck's only win. So in a situation like this kind of card in that deck, mill is great. I can win games with this kind of mill set strategy. Especially stacked up with other, like even the ones that only target a specific player. If you're punishing one person in particular to mill some 8-10 cards for every card you draw, like they will lose the game eventually. You will get them out, Stack a Psychic Corrosion with a Sphinx's Tutelage and a Teferi's Tutelage and things like that, and you're going to get somebody out with all of that hate against them.
Interesting. What are those other two cards, the Sphinx's Tutelage?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So they're like Psychic Corrosion, Sphinx's Tutelage and Teferi's Tutelage. They have the same trigger of when you would draw a card, it makes a target opponent mill a card. So it's not like Psychic Corrosion that hits all players. You have to target a specific person. But each of them do their own added thing that benefits. I'd like to point out Sphinx's Tutelage. You can hose a monocolored deck if you play against them. Sphinx's Tutelage repeats its trigger if non-land cards that share a color. Honestly, actually, not even monocolored deck. You can just get a 2-color deck too. Honestly, because it doesn't care. It doesn't care what color combos it milled. If both of those non-lands share a color, do it again.
That's probably... Yeah, that one's really good, because then you can target the mono or 2-color deck with that.
Yeah.
And just pop off.
Yeah.
And it has a way to make you draw a card and start that whole process.
Inherently, yes, exactly. Yes. Right. So, like, yeah, I think ultimately the point comes down to, though, is like, Mill has a weird sort of like arc flux when it comes to it, right? Like you've got the bad mill cards. They're like target player mills 2. Don't play those. No. Don't play those, right?
Don't play Tome Scour.
Yeah, play Tome Scour. Like only if you're using those as a target yourself for self mill. I could see those maybe, right? Like you could Thought Scour yourself to throw 2 cards into the bin and then draw a card. Absolutely. Yeah. But trying to hit all of your opponents with stuff like that, don't play those.
Correct.
Then you have sort of the middle, where we're talking about with here, where you have inherently mill related win condition cards that you put into other strategies, right? Put Consuming Aberration into a deck that's casting lots of spells. Put a Psychic Corrosion into a deck that's drawing lots of cards,
I would even say that Traumatize is in the relatively casual pile of mill cards for Commander, because it is target player puts half their library into their graveyard.
Yeah.
Target. So it only takes care of half of one person's library, and that is one of the best mill cards.
Yeah,
that's why hot take. That's why I think Xander would be cool, is because you have all the red double your instance
the copy stuff.
No, Jared, you're not forking traumatize.
You fork traumatize, you kill somebody.
Do it.
You play cast as a mage on your next turn, you do it again.
You've spent 2 cards, 7 mana to mill half of 2 different players' library.
I didn't say it was good. I said it'd be funny. Wouldn't it be funny to traumatize the whole table like that?
All right. Traumatize you, copy it, traumatize you, swing consuming aberration at player 3.
Everybody needs to go to therapy because everyone is personally
the whole table
traumatized.
has been traumatized by how hard you worked for that win.
Yeah. Since we've been doing all this talk about mill, whatever, would you guys be interested in some mill fun facts as we sort of like draw to a wrap up a little bit?
Wrap us up with some fun facts, Sean.
Okay. I assume this is probably going to be a obvious question, but do either of you know where the term mill comes from?
Millstone.
Very good. Very good. Jared, did you know that?
I did.
All right.
I'm still
Jared,
bending
say
down.
That you
by
know
the way.
it after I know it.
All right, Joseph. All right. Follow up. When was Millstone printed?
Tempest.
Jared? Antiquities.
It's close.
Antiquities. Millstone is the first card to basically have the keyword text on it that would later become codified the term mill. But because it originated from a card called Millstone, the act of a player of some capacity, either all players, yourself, or a target, putting a card from your library to your graveyard, that got shorthanded to a player given term mill. Wizards R&D even picked it up as terminology as they were designing cards, only becoming codified as a keyword in Core Set 2021.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
Wow.
At the time, I was heavily listening to Mark Rosewater's Drive to Work podcast, which I would recommend for anybody who wants to like up their Magic game, is just learn from the designer. But he was talking about like, we were trying to find a word to represent what mill does. We're trying to figure out a keyword, and we could never find a good one. And everyone just referred to it as mill in our like testing anyways. We're like, we might as well just call it mill.
I think it works very well. I think you're right.
I was just going to say, that's so weird to me that just happened in 2021, because I feel like I've been referring to it as mill, like, since I knew what the mechanic did.
Technically 2020, because core sets were numbered the year prior.
It's like new cars.
To indicate how long that they were standard legal for. So core set 2021 came out in July 2020.
Nice. Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like I've been referring to it like that for way longer than that, like way before. When Core Set 2021 came out, a mass oracle change was added to all previous cards printed before that had the codified word on it to gain the card mill. Would either of you like to take a guess how many cards that was?
200.
200? Jared?
Can you repeat the question? I sort of paid attention to the way you worded it.
How many cards received the oracle change to gain the keyword mill on them? These would have been cards printed before July 2020. Joseph said 200.
I'm going to say 100.
100? Joseph is going to be the closest. 211.
Nice.
So close.
Wow,
so
dude.
Close.
That's insane.
Yeah, 211 unique cards printed before July 2020, codified with mill.
Nice.
Fun fact.
Yeah, fun facts.
I love
Man.
it. Well,
as
we wrap up.
Can you tell I did my research?
You did.
Yes.
John did his homework.
Yeah.
Final thoughts. Final thoughts. John, what's your opinion on mill? Thumbs up, thumbs down, and commander.
I'll give it right in the middle. You know, I think it has good use. self mill is incredible. And if you really want to try, like, I think doing mill on your opponents is a very fun challenge deck, right? I think you can do some very fun things with it. I think, unfortunately, you have to inherently either go into turn that mill into graveyard hate or turn that mill into a graveyard recursion style deck, take advantage of the things that you are milling. But yeah, I mean, there are inherently just single really great cards that help fuel the mill opponent strategy, but also just self mill is very good as well. I like it. I enjoy mill.
Nice.
So you
Jared?
like self mill, not so big on other mill?
I'd say I mixed in the both, right? Like as the deck builder for my wife's Umbrasphere Manifest deck that is kind of like exile mill.
Yeah.
That plays very well. As a self mill player with Arami of the Dead Tide, I also enjoy self mill. So I'm a mill enjoyer across the board.
Average mill enjoyer.
My thoughts on mill. I think mill sucks. Don't play it. Play something else. You become arch enemy and you work way hard to do it. Cards are expensive and it's either really bad or it's too strong and it's still not in CDH. So that's my summary on mill.
Yeah.
Joseph, take it away.
Yeah, I guess the wrapping it back up to the initial question, which is why does no one play mill in Commander? I think you nailed it, Jared. I think it's either really bad or way too good, and it doesn't sit in a spot that people enjoy playing against. Certainly not. So
it's even worse than stacks.
Yeah, you end up being the arch enemy, and it is really, really hard to win. When you could just be like, if you were just playing creatures, like if all of your mill cards in your deck were just a creature instead, you probably would have a vanilla creature. You probably would have an easier time winning the game.
And everyone would have more fun.
Yeah. So I hope that we've answered why does no one really play mill in Commander. You totally can. It is, it's a free world. You can do whatever you want and play mill. Try it out. You'll probably come to the same conclusion that it's not amazing, but like, man, the times that you pull it off, it's going to be so cool. So best of luck with any of that. Should we do a budget brewery?
Oh, shoot.
Let's do it.
All right. I'll start while Jared's finding his. We didn't.
Yes, please. I was totally curveballed on that one. Wasn't thinking about that at all.
I love throwing you curveballs, Jared.
Keep doing it. Never stop.
Okay, since we're talking about mill decks, let's talk about Blast Zone. Blast Zone is one of my favorite lands. Let me pull it up on Scryfall here. Blast Zone is a colorless land. Enters the battlefield with a charge counter on it. Taps for a colorless. You can pay XX and tap it to put X charge counters on it. Or you can pay 3 and tap it to sacrifice Blast Zone, destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of charge counters on Blast Zone. It costs 50 cents, and it can go in any deck. So this is one of those cards that if you're playing mono blue mill, if you're playing Bruvac or something, you can afford to play a colorless land, and this is a mass removal spell of non-land permanents on a land that doesn't take up a land spot. So stuff like this, stuff like Bajuka Bog, is stuff that people should be playing. And that's the whole point of Budget Brewery. So Blast Zone is my pick.
Yes. Okay. So they don't necessarily. I was looking through my self mill deck since we were talking all about mill or whatever. As I just decided I was just picking one of these cards. I would talk about one of my recent favorites as far as a reanimator spell. If you are doing self mill, I want to bring up Blood for Bones.
I knew you were going to say it. I was already typing in Blood for Bones as you were talking about.
I love this card. I love this card. Inherently, it's worse than Victimize, but I do like this card because it gives you access to do a variety of things. Blood for Bones is a 3 and a black for a sorcery. It says, as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, then return another creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So yes, technically this is kind of say worse than Victimize,
Totally
right?
different than Victimize.
Yeah, Victimize does bring you back 2 creatures, yes. What Blood for Bones does a little differently is, one, the 2 parts of the second half of this card, returning a card to play and returning a card to hand, either of those 2 clauses can be the creature you sacrifice as the additional cost.
It doesn't target.
Yeah, it doesn't target. So in a weird kind of way, Blood for Bones can kind of act as this strange black blink spell, right?
Blink.
Yeah, even though it's a sorcery. So you're kind of out as far as using it as a blocker combat trick kind of thing. Being able to blink back into play the creature that you just sacrificed as part of its cost, and you then get something else back to your hand for later, which can also, again, be the card you sacrificed.
Yeah.
So if, say, you sacrifice a creature that has a relevant cast trigger, like, say, the new Sauron, for example, right? We said in our podcast episode that Sauron, the Dark Lord, or Sauron, Lord of the Rings, specifically from the precon, you want to throw him into the graveyard. You don't want to be recasting him from the command zone. Blood for Bones, he's in the graveyard. You sacrifice something else, and you could either recur Sauron right back into play, or you can put Sauron back in your hand, and then you can recast him, and you get that cast trigger.
Yes. And get around commander decks.
Yeah. And as well, just as a nice little side, the creature that comes into play off of Blood for Bones, as compared to Victimize, does not come into play tapped.
Mm-hmm.
And since it makes you sacrifice a creature as part of the cost as well, you're now triggering anything on your board that cares about a creature dying, cares about a creature card going to your graveyard. If you have any sort of effects, what's his face? Sir Conrad the Grim. Oh. He loves cards going to your graveyard and exiting your graveyard. Yeah. This with Sir Conrad is amazing.
That represents 3 damage with Sir Conrad.
Yes, it does. And
you got trigger and 2 creatures leaving your graveyard.
And that's not even counting whatever triggers you got going on the thing you sacrificed. And you don't you can pick 2 completely different creatures, right? You got a random token that just wants to die. Fantastic. Now you've
value.
Hey, you've recurred your Consuming Aberration with this.
Yes. That's pretty sick.
There you go. So Blood for Bones, it's, a little more pricey for a recursion spell, but
it cost 18 cents.
Oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it costs 18 cents to buy them, but 1 extra mana over Victimize, I think it does enough relevant things to.
Yeah, but also, ¿por qué no los dos?
What?
Play them both.
Yeah, exactly. As a completely separate from the card itself as well, I'm a sucker for Seb McKinnon as an artist.
I was going to say, that's unbelievable art.
Right. Blood for Bones is up there as one of my top 3 of his art.
It's the but why skeleton?
I'm looking up the art right now.
Oh, it's very good. It's if you've ever seen any art from Seb McKinnon, he does fantastic
my gosh.
work. All right, Jared.
All right, I found it. It's slightly above $1, but it's, to me, that's still pretty cheap. It's $1.55 on Card Kingdom. Relic of Legends. It's 3 for a colorless mana rock. Essentially, it says tap to add 1 mana of any color, so it's great. But it also has the clause on it: tap an untapped legendary creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. So all of your legendaries become mana dorks for any color. I run this in my 5-color Ramos deck. Honestly, any deck that runs a lot of legendary permanent or legendary creatures should just run this.
Which it's kind of becoming most decks these days. Like, I feel like every set since Dominaria United has just been a Legendary Matters set. So there's many good legendary creatures that, I would say half of each of my decks at this point are just legendary creatures.
Yes. Yes.
So Relic of Legends becomes strong.
Yeah. Even the newer
creatures, it doesn't matter whether they have teeth or not.
Because here's the floor. Here's the floor with Relic of Legends. You're playing Commander. You're playing a legendary creature. At at minimum, if you insist that you need to play a 3-mana mana rock, this is a manalith that allows your commander to tap for a mana. Like, there's the floor. And then it just increases from there.
Yep. It's really good.
It's pretty good.
When I've gotten to like play this and it's stuck around, it's been huge in the game.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. As far
I don't
as
know if you need to play this in anything under color deck, though. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I think there are better options for 2-color or monocolored.
agree.
Decks, but
Monocolor does not need this unless you're just like playing a crazy amount of legendary creatures in a monocolor deck.
Mhm.
It would still be good in that regard. It would basically become a Cryptolith Right.
Yeah,
It's basically Cryptolith Right stamped onto a mana rock if
pretty
you
good.
think about it that way and you're running enough legendary creatures. So
Can't complain about it.
Commander as a format has shifted the way that Magic thinks about its own game, and they print a ton of legendary creatures into everything now. So
Yes.
that's why there's so many legendary creatures saturating the format, and that's what makes this card so good. And I didn't even know this card existed until Joseph helped me build this Ramos deck, and he was like, "This has to go in." I was like, "Yes, it does."
Pretty good.
So yeah, that's my budget pick for the week.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, guys, this has been fun. Thanks for listening. If you've made it this far, we appreciate you guys. Link in our bio if you want to join our Discord. We're on there all the time hanging out. Give us a like, a comment, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your mom, tell everybody. We said hey. And we'll catch you next time on the MTG Thoughtcast. Catch you guys later.